Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at something that is arguably the biggest, most ambitious, and let's be honest, certainly the most expensive undertaking in modern Indonesian history.
It's a big one.
We're talking about the Makanan Bergizi Gratis.
Nutritious Meal Program.
Yeah.
Or as pretty much everyone knows it by now, the MBG.
Exactly. And just to give you a sense of the scale here, we aren't talking about a pilot project in a few schools. We are talking about a machine designed to feed an entire nation. It's just massive.
Monumental. And, it's the kind of policy that, on paper, it looks like a legacy builder. You're talking about feeding the future, ending stunting, fueling the next generation of leaders. It sounds perfect.
But,
and there's always a but in these deep dives.
There always is, because we have a stack of sources today that paints a very, very different picture. We are looking at academic analyses by researchers like Toronata, Tambun, and Aragustoma.
And we have these scathing reports from Indonesia Corruption Watch, the ICW, and the Ombudsman.
And then, on top of all that, we have these really quiet, powerful, personal narratives that they just stop you in your tracks.
It's a heavy mix, because when you start to peel back the layers of the MBG program, it isn't really a story about food anymore.
No, not at all.
It becomes a story about two competing forces.
Right. It really feels like a battle for the soul of the country's governance. On one side, you have this grand vision, right? Golden Indonesia, 2045. This dream of a powerful, healthy, high-tech nation.
But on the other side, our sources are pointing to what they call a corruption incentive loop. And it is, well, it's ugly.
Systemic rot. That's the term they use.
That's the term. And what makes this specific deep dive so fascinating, I think, is that we aren't just looking at the accounting fraud, the numbers. We're going to go deeper into the philosophy of it all. We're going to look at what our sources call the axiology of dignity.
Axiology of dignity. That is a phrase we are definitely going to unpack later, and trust me, you'll want to stick around for that. It asks a really uncomfortable question.
A very uncomfortable question.
Is free always the answer? Or, as one of our sources suggests, are we in danger of feeding the body while starving the soul?
It's a question that challenges the entire premise of the modern welfare state. But before we get to the philosophy, we have to look at the reality on the ground.
Let's set the scene. So it's 2026. The program has been up and running for a bit, managed by the Badan Gizi the National Nutrition Agency.
Right.
And the government moved fast on this. I mean, lightning fast. They wanted this up and running immediately.
Speed was the #1 priority. And in logistics, when speed is the only priority, usually safety is the first casualty.
And that is exactly what the reports show. We have these accounts of the immediate aftermath of the rollout, and it is not the happy children eating lunch photos you see on social media.
Yeah.
We're talking about hospitals.
Specifically, we're looking at a major incident in central Java. This wasn't isolated. It was across 15 districts.
Yes.
We saw reports of children being rushed to emergency rooms with severe nausea, vomiting, dehydration. I mean, it was a public health crisis.
And the culprit? What was in the food?
E. coli.
E. coli
Yeah.
in school lunches. That's a parent's worst nightmare. You send your kid to school thinking they're getting a nutritious meal, and you end up at the hospital with them on an IV drip.
And this is where the government's response really tells you everything you need to know about the mindset, the officials.
They didn't exactly apologize. There was no big "we messed up."
No, I read this quote and I had read it twice. They called it a learning curve.
A learning curve.
Imagine telling a mother whose child is sick, "Don't worry, ma'am, this is just part of our learning curve." It's just staggering.
It's incredibly dismissive. The official statement tried to use statistics to soften the blow, which only made it worse. They cited a fatality rate of, get this, 0.0000017%.
So they're treating it like a rounding error. Essentially, yes. The argument was, look at the sheer scale of this operation. We're feeding millions. In the grand scheme of things, a few hundred sick kids is a tiny margin of error.
Which, okay, if you're an actuary or a statistician crunching numbers for an insurance company, maybe that math holds up. But we are talking about human beings. We're talking about children.
And this brings us to the first big concept from our source material: moral accounting.
Okay, break that down for us.
Moral accounting argues that in a program specifically designed to protect the most vulnerable, in this case, children, you cannot use standard efficiency statistics. It's just not applicable.
So one death is not 0.00017%.
One preventable death, Or one severe hospitalization isn't a statistic, it is a total failure of foresight. It's a complete system failure.
It's the difference between managing a factory and managing a school. If a car factory has a defect rate of 0.000017%, that's amazing. You get a bonus.
Right.
If a school lunch program poisons kids at that rate, that's a tragedy, and it's an avoidable one.
Precisely. And Toronata Tambun's academic analysis points out that this reveals a governance loop that is fundamentally reactive.
Reactive, not proactive.
Exactly. The system is designed to learn only after the harm has occurred.
Hmm.
They didn't have the safeguards to anticipate E. coli. They just waited for it to happen and then said, oops, we'll fix it next time.
It implies that the safety of the children was at best secondary to the political win of launching the program quickly.
Speed over safety. Optics over outcome. That's the pattern.
And when you start digging into why the food was contaminated, why the safety wasn't there, you inevitably have to follow the money. And this is where the math starts to get, well, fuzzy is being polite.
Fuzzy is very polite. Let's look at the budget allocation. The government officially set the price at 15,000 Indonesian rupiah per meal per child.
Okay, 15,000 rupiah. For our international listeners, that's roughly $1, maybe a little bit less.
Depending on the exchange rate, yeah, roughly $1. Now, in Indonesia, specifically in rural areas or even in the outskirts of Jakarta, 15,000 rupiah is a workable budget. You can get a decent meal, some rice, a piece of chicken or fish, some vegetables, maybe a piece of fruit for that price.
Great. I can go to a local warung right now and get a solid nasi rames for that. It's not gourmet, but it's real, honest food.
Exactly. So the budget itself wasn't the issue. The 15,000 figure was reasonable. The issue was what happened to that money between the Ministry of Finance and the child's plate. Investigations from multiple sources, including the Ombudsman, revealed that the actual production cost of the meals being served was often less than 7,500 rupiah.
Wait, hang on. So the government pays 15,000, but the food on the plate only costs 7,500 to make.
Correct. And often it was even less than that.
That means half the budget, 50%, is just... And where does it go? It's just vanishing.
Vanishing into what the sources call the corruption incentive loop. And this is the absolute core of the financial analysis in our sources.
So explain that loop.
When you create these massive centralized budgets, you aren't just funding a meal program. You are creating a honeypot. You are creating a powerful incentive for bad actors to find ways to extract value from every single point in the supply chain.
So the program stops serving the children and starts serving the contractors.
It starts serving its own momentum. The goal shifts. It becomes spend the budget, not feed the child, because the leftover money, the vanished money, that becomes political rewards, which then justifies even larger allocations next year. It's a self-perpetuating cycle.
And we have some specific documented examples of how this theft happens. And I really want to talk about the tray.
Oh, the tray. Yes.
I saw this in the Indonesia Corruption Watch report, and I honestly thought it was a typo. I thought they must have added an extra zero.
It wasn't a typo.
So evidence A in this corruption loop is the plastic meal tray, just the plate the food is served on. The report highlights procurement fraud, where these simple plastic trays were priced at 80,000 rupiah each.
Let's just sit with that number for a second. 80,000 rupiah.
For a piece of plastic.
For a single mass-produced compartmentalized plastic plate.
Okay, I need to do a reality check here.
Yeah.
If I go to a market Pasar Senen or any market in Jakarta and I want to buy a plastic plate like that, how much am I paying?
For a standard food-grade plastic tray, retail,
Yeah.
maybe 15,000. If you're buying in bulk, which the government definitely is, we're talking millions of units, you are probably looking at 10,000 to 12,000 rupiah per tray, at most.
So we are talking about a markup of what? 600%, 700%. It's absurd.
It's easily a 700% markup. And remember, that is 80,000 rupiah per child just for the plate. That is more than 5 times the cost of the actual food that's supposed to be inside the plate.
Why do they do it this way? I mean, it seems so blatant. Why steal on the tray? Why not just steal the money allocated for the beef or the chicken?
Oh, they do that too, which we will definitely get to. But the tray represents CapEx, capital expenditure. It's a one-time purchase. If you're a corrupt official or a shady contractor, you'll love CapEx.
Why? Because it's harder to track.
It's cleaner. It's a big lump sum payment right up front. You get a contract to supply 1 million trays. You inflate the price by, say, 65,000 rupiah each. That is 65 billion rupiah in pure profit that you can walk away with on day one of the contract.
Wow.
It's much cleaner than skimming a little bit off the rice budget every single day for a year. That requires daily effort. This is a one-and-done heist.
That is just sickening. You are basically looting the national treasury through plastic plates. And the kids are eating worse food because the money that should have gone to protein went into someone's pocket via a piece of plastic.
It creates a mechanism where the infrastructure of the meal becomes more expensive than the nutrition itself. The program is, in effect, buying overpriced plastic instead of high-quality protein.
But as you said, they didn't stop at the plastic. They went after the food, too. The Ombudsman RI found some really serious issues with the most basic staple of all.
Ah, the premium rice fraud. This is a classic bait and switch. It's as old as government contracts themselves.
How does that work in this context?
So the government contract is very specific. It specifies premium rice. In Indonesia, as you know, rice grades are a big deal. Premium rice has a certain whiteness, a certain low percentage of broken grains, a specific smell when cooked. It costs more for a reason.
Right. It's the good stuff, the stuff you'd serve to guests.
It's the good stuff. So the contractors bill the government for premium rice. They submit invoices that say premium rice and get paid the premium price. But then they go to the market and buy medium or even low-grade rice.
Which is much, much cheaper.
Much cheaper. It has more broken grains. Maybe it's a bit yellowish. Maybe it's been sitting in the warehouse too long and has a musty smell. It's nutritionally inferior, and it doesn't taste as good.
So they just swap the bags or mix it.
Sometimes they physically rebag it. Sometimes they just mix it. But the end result is that they pocket the difference in price per kilogram. And you have to multiply that small difference by millions and millions of kilos being procured for the program. It's another fortune stolen, grain by grain.
And meanwhile, the kids are eating subpar, lower quality rice.
Exactly. And rice is the staple. It's the foundation of every meal. If you are compromising the quality of the rice, you are compromising the very foundation of the nutritious meal.
It just feels so thorough. So cynical. Like they looked at every single angle of this program and asked, how can we make money off this instead of how can we best feed these kids?
That is the very definition of the corruption incentive loop in action. But I think the most damaging part of this loop, the part that our sources really dig into, isn't even the theft of money. It is the theft of opportunity.
What do you mean by that?
I'm talking about the deliberate exclusion of the local community, the economic partnership loop that was promised to the public but never delivered.
Oh, right. Because when they sold this program to the public, the pitch was that it would be a huge boost for small businesses.
Yes. The rhetoric was beautiful. It was populist. They said, we will use the local warung. And for those who don't know, a warung is a small family-owned food stall. They are everywhere in Indonesia. They are the backbone of the informal economy.
So the idea was that the lady who has been running a little canteen next to the school for 20 years, the one all the kids know, she would get the contract to feed the kids.
It makes total sense, right?
Right.
She knows the kids. She knows the local taste. Her kitchen is already there. She doesn't need a new building or a fleet of trucks. She buys her ingredients from the local market. It's a closed local economic loop.
But that's not who got the contracts.
Not even close. Instead of the existing warungs and school canteens, the contracts were overwhelmingly awarded to what the reports call new entities.
New entities. That just sounds suspicious on its face.
It is the bureaucratic term for what are essentially shell companies or pop-up caterers. The sources describe companies that were formed solely to meet the contractual criteria for the MBG program. Some of these companies didn't exist 6 months before the program launched.
So how does a company that didn't exist 6 months ago with no track record in food service get a multi-billion rupiah government contract?
Connections. Patronage. The reports found that these new entities were often tied to local political figures, military families, or people with access. They had no industrial kitchens, they had no trained chefs, they had no experience in food safety or logistics. But they had the right uncle in the local government office.
So the canteen lady, the one who actually knows how to cook soto ayam and has been doing it safely for decades, she gets pushed out.
She gets completely crushed. She watches a shiny new truck from a new entity roll up to the school, delivering pre-packaged, cold, boxed meals that cost twice as much as hers, but taste half as good. It is political patronage masquerading as public service.
It is tragic because the infrastructure was already there. We have millions of cooks in this country. We didn't need to invent new catering companies out of thin air.
And this is where the deep dive gets really interesting, historically speaking, because the sources draw this incredible contrast between this modern, bureaucratic, corrupt mess and the moment in Indonesian history where the country actually got this right, without any budget at all.
You're talking about the Dapur guerrilla.
The guerrilla kitchens.
I love this part of the research. It takes us back to the 1940s, the war for independence against the Dutch, a completely different world.
It is. Imagine the chaos of war. You have fighters guerrillas hiding in the forests, moving through villages at night. They didn't have a Ministry of Defense logistics corps. They didn't have a multi-billion rupiah budget. They certainly didn't have plastic trays.
So how did they eat? How did they stay alive?
The people fed them. The Dapur guerrilla were voluntary community kitchens organized by the villagers themselves, spontaneously.
And nobody was paying them. There were no contracts.
No, these are poor villagers. But they cooked what they had. They organized their own supply lines. The sources tell stories of women who would risk their lives smuggling rice balls wrapped in banana leaves past Dutch patrols to feed the fighters.
Why would they do that?
Because they believed in the cause. It was a national project they were a part of. This was what the sources call a moral infrastructure. The villagers weren't passive recipients of aid from a distant government. They were active sustainers of the nation's fight for freedom. It all relied on trust, shared sacrifice, and local control.
And the contrast with the MBG program today is just painful. It's stark.
It is. Today, we have billions of dollars, high-tech logistics software, and fancy PowerPoint presentations in Jakarta, but we have somehow lost that moral infrastructure. By bypassing the local kitchens and the genuine village cooperatives for these centralized, politically connected contractors, the program broke that lineage of care.
They ignored the artifacts of care that already existed in the community.
Exactly. They tried to build a machine where they should have been tending to a garden. And the sources point out that even the term cooperative, or koperasi, has been hijacked in this process.
Right, because on paper, the government claims they are working with cooperatives.
But the new wave of cooperatives involved in the MBG were often centrally formed under political banners.
Yeah.
It was, as one source calls it, political choreography. They looked like cooperatives on paper, they had the right stamps, but they functioned like top-down distribution centers for the politically connected, not bottom-up community services.
So you have a policy that looks great in a boardroom in Jakarta, but when it actually hits the ground in a village in Java or Sumatra, it just doesn't fit. It's disconnected. Which brings us to another huge problem identified in the sources: the cultural and logistical mismatch.
This is a classic case of what happens when you try to copy-paste a policy from one country to another without looking out the window. The sources mention that the MBG was heavily inspired by successful school meal models in places like Norway, the frokost concept, or Brazil.
Norway. Okay. I've seen pictures of Norwegian school lunches. They look amazing. Whole grain bread, fresh salmon, cheese, cucumber slices. Very organized, very clean.
Very cold. I mean, the temperature. Norway is basically a giant refrigerator for half the year. And beyond the weather, they have an incredibly efficient modern logistics system. Their cold chain, that's the network of refrigerated trucks and warehouses, is flawless. You can move fresh fish from the coast to an inland school, and it stays perfectly chilled the entire time.
And Indonesia.
Indonesia is an archipelago of over 17,000 islands straddling the equator. It is hot. The humidity is 90% on a good day. And the sources highlight a massive cooling gap.
What exactly is a cooling gap?
There are roughly 27 million small farmers in Indonesia. The vast majority of them do not have access to any kind of cold storage. They don't have a refrigerated warehouse. They don't have a refrigerated truck.
So if you try to do a farm-to-table model where you're sourcing fresh milk or meat from a small local farmer.
If you don't get that fresh milk into a fridge within an hour or two in the tropical heat, what happens?
It spoils rapidly.
It rots. Bacteria grows. And that brings us right back to the E. coli we discussed at the start. You cannot simply transplant a Scandinavian model into a tropical archipelago without building the fundamental infrastructure first. It's a logistical fantasy.
And then there's the cultural side of it, which is just as big a mismatch, the Jajan culture.
This is fascinating sociology. The policy, designed in a sterile boardroom, assumed that Indonesian kids eat a structured sit-down breakfast. It assumed a Western rhythm of 3 square meals a day.
But anyone who has spent more than 5 minutes in Indonesia knows that isn't really how it works.
No. Life revolves around Jajan, snacking, grazing.
It's the neighborhood rhythm.
Exactly. Kids don't sit down for a heavy meal of rice and chicken at 7 a.m. They grab a skewer of silk tapioca balls from a vendor on the way to school. They buy batagor at the school gate during break time. They buy sweets and little fried things during recess.
And it's a social thing, too. It's part of their independence, having a little money to choose what they want.
It absolutely is. It's how they interact with their environment and their peers. So when the government comes in and forces a standardized sit-down meal on them, here is your box of rice and vegetables at 10 a.m.
The kids aren't hungry, or they just plain don't want it.
A lot of it gets wasted. The sources note that these standardized meals were often rejected or only partially eaten because they were so detached from the daily life of the children. They weren't what the kids wanted or were used to eating at that time.
So the program is fighting against the existing culture instead of working with it?
Precisely. And the sources make a brilliant argument here. Why are you trying to destroy the Ajahn culture? Why not try to fix it?
Meaning what?
Meaning, if the kids are going to snack anyway, make the snacks safer and healthier. Empower the street vendors. Give them hygiene training. Subsidize them to use better ingredients. Fortify the flour they use. Make the silic nutritious. Don't try to abolish an entire ecosystem of food culture. Adapt to it and improve it from within.
That would require a level of nuance and local understanding that seems to be completely missing from this top-down approach.
Nuance doesn't scale as easily as overpriced plastic trays.
Oof, that is a stinging line. But it brings us to the part of the deep dive that really struck me. We've talked about the corruption, the logistics, the history. But now I want to pivot to the philosophy, because the sources argue that the word free isn't just a budget line item, it is a moral concept. And it is not always a good one.
This is the axiology of dignity. It sounds very academic, but it's deeply human. It asks, what is the value, the worth of a human being? And how does providing free things affect that value?
And we have two incredible stories from the sources that illustrate this perfectly. And I want to take some time here because these aren't statistics, these are people. The first one is about a Betawi restaurant in Jakarta that serves a dish called pukung.
Yes, a modest place, not fancy. The Observer, one of our researchers, makes a point of noting that the staff mostly have only an elementary school education. They aren't the high-skilled workforce the government dreams about for 2045. They aren't coding apps or designing microchips. They are serving soup.
But the description of them is so powerful.
The researcher describes them working with this incredible discipline, with what he calls quiet pride. And he explicitly says there was no sign of pity in their work. They weren't asking for help. They weren't victims. They were professionals providing a service.
And the argument drawn from this is that the greatest nutrition isn't a free meal handed to you. It's the meaning you get from your own work.
It suggests that dignity comes from being useful, from earning your place, from effort.
Yeah.
Which leads us directly to the story that I think is the emotional core of this entire episode, the story of Mass T.
Mass T, the taxi driver. I want to pivot here completely. We've been talking about billions of rupiah, about corruption loops and E. coli. But the part of this research stack that actually made me put my tablet down and just stare at the wall for a minute was the story of Mass T.
It's the emotional anchor of the whole analysis, isn't it? It grounds everything.
It really does. So, for the listeners, let's paint the picture. Mass T is a Bluebird taxi driver. And if you've ever been to Indonesia, you know Bluebird. They are the reliable ones, the professionals. You get in, the AC is on, the driver is in a clean uniform.
Right. But Mass T isn't just a driver. He is a survivor of a system that failed him decades ago. The report details his childhood. He didn't drop out of school because he wasn't smart or because he was lazy. He dropped out of elementary school SD because his family couldn't pay the school dues.
And we aren't talking about him dropping out to play video games or hang out. What was he doing instead?
He was working. As a child, he was driving a BCAC, a cycle rickshaw. Just try to imagine that. A child barely big enough to reach the pedals, hauling adult passengers and their groceries around the market in the tropical heat.
There is one detail in the source material that really haunts me. It describes where he slept at night.
Inside the BCAC, he and his father would park their rickshaws in a corner of the market at night, curl up on the passenger seat, and sleep there. That was their home. Exposed to the elements, mosquitoes, all kinds of danger.
So fast forward to today, to 2026. This man has clawed his way up from sleeping in a rickshaw to being a professional driver for a respected company. He has stability, he has dignity, he has a uniform. And when the interviewer asks him about the free meal program, about all the scandals, about the politics, what does he say?
He says, "My mind is filled with work."
My mind is filled with work.
It's such a powerful rejection of all the noise. He isn't looking for a handout. He isn't looking for a free meal for his kids. In fact, he views the entire concept of free with deep suspicion. And he delivered a line that I think should be etched of the door of the Ministry of Finance.
Read it for us.
He said, "Dignity comes from effort, not titles, and never from gratis."
Never from gratis, never from free. That runs so counter to everything we're told about modern welfare states, doesn't it?
Right.
We assume that giving people things makes them better off. Mass T is suggesting that giving people things, if it removes the need for effort, might actually take something vital away from them.
He represents the iceberg beneath the noise.
Hmm.
The government is talking about Golden Indonesia 2045 and creating high-tech talent, but here's a man who, because the system failed him, still needs an elementary school certificate just to drive a car or use Google Maps for his job. But he has found stability and peace because he works. His effort gives him meaning.
And this connects to the reference in the sources to Ocean.
The legendary Japanese drama.
For our younger listeners, Ocean was a massive cultural phenomenon in Asia in the 80s and 90s. It's this epic story of a girl born into abject poverty who works her way up through sheer, unrelenting grit and hard work.
And her philosophy, which resonated so deeply with audiences, was what the sources call the servant's credo. Born to work, born to endure, labor is dignity. The connection the sources make is that a full stomach without effort leaves an empty heart.
That is a poetic way to put it, but it has real, tangible economic consequences, too. Because if you give free meals at schools using these big centralized contractors, you are effectively bankrupting the local mom-and-pop stalls, the warungs, that rely on those student customers for their daily income.
Exactly. You are destroying the livelihoods of the parents, the mass T's of the world, the restaurant workers, in the name of feeding their children. You might be filling the child's belly for lunch, but you are emptying the family's rice bowl for dinner because the parents have lost their source of income. It's a cruel paradox.
It creates a dependency culture. It undermines the resilience of the very community you claim you're trying to help.
It forces you to ask the question, are we helping or are we disabling?
So, if the philosophical argument is that free can be corrosive, and the logistical argument is that the current system is broken and corrupt, does that mean the government should just do nothing? Because we still have millions of stunted kids. We still have real malnutrition.
Now, and this is where the sources pivot from sociology to hard biology. They call it the biological imperative. It turns out there is a very strict, non-negotiable deadline on human development.
This is the first 1,000 days concept.
Correct. But let's look at the actual neuroscience here for a moment, because this is where the MBG policy, as it's designed, really misses the mark completely.
Okay.
When a baby is born, their brain is literally exploding with synaptic connections. It's incredibly plastic. It's forming the highways that will carry their thoughts for the rest of their life. This process of building the brain's core architecture peaks between conception and around age 3 to 5.
So the brain is basically under construction in those early years.
Massively. But by the time a child is 6 or 7 years old, which is the age they enter primary school, and would start receiving this MBG-free lunch, that critical window is closing fast. The neural architecture, as the researchers call it, is largely paved. The foundations are set.
So if a child is malnourished at age 2, and they are already cognitively stunted, and then you start feeding them a premium steak dinner every day at age 7.
You can make them physically stronger. You can give them energy for the day. That's good. But you cannot go back in time and reverse the cognitive stunting. You cannot rebuild the complex brain structures that failed to grow properly 5 years earlier because of a lack of nutrients.
That is a terrifying thought.
It is. And it makes the MBG program, in its current form targeting school-age kids, look like a massive medical error. We're applying the medicine 5 years too late.
It's like putting a cast on a broken leg after the bone has already healed in a crooked position. The damage is done.
That is a perfect analogy. And the sources argue with this biological data that if you have a limited number of billions to spend, you don't spend it on school lunches for 10-year-olds. You spend every single rupiah on pregnant mothers, on infants, and on toddlers. That is where you buy the future of the nation.
And this connects directly to the Human Development Index, the HDI.
It's a clear causal loop. Stunting affects brain development. Poor brain development affects school attainment, how well a child can learn to read and do math. Poor school attainment affects their future income potential. If you want to boost the nation's GDP in 2045, you have to fix the brain development phase in 2026. It's that simple.
So the proposal from the sources is to fundamentally shift the focus. Stop trying to do this massive corruption-prone logistical operation for school lunches and focus entirely on prenatal and early childhood nutrition.
Yes. Invest in prenatal vitamins, fortified milk for toddlers, nutritional counseling for new mothers in the village health posts. That isn't charity or a handout in the way Mass T was critical of. It's a direct, targeted investment in building the nation's mind. It is scientifically sound and ultimately economically more effective.
It seems so obvious when you lay it out like that. Catch the problem before the damage becomes permanent. But I guess feeding a toddler in a private home isn't as politically visible as feeding a classroom full of kids in uniform.
It's far less politically visible. A free lunch program at school is a great photo op. You can take a picture of a politician handing happy kids lunch boxes. Prenatal vitamins. That happens quietly, in private. It doesn't make for great campaign billboards, but it's what actually works.
So where do we go from here? The program exists, the money is allocated, the sources suggest we shouldn't just scrap it, that would be politically impossible anyway, but we need to completely renew it.
They outline a path forward with 4 very specific, non-negotiable conditions. If MBG is going to get a second chance, it has to be a radically different program.
Let's run through them. Condition number 1, food quality.
This is basic. It must be fresh, safe, and truly local. No more 4-day-old ingredients being transported across an island in a non-refrigerated truck. No more E. coli. This means either fixing the cold chain or, better yet, sourcing from the farm right next door so you don't even need a cold chain.
Condition number 2, targeting.
The priority must shift to pregnant mothers and toddlers, the age 0 to 5 demographic. That is the non-negotiable biological reality. If you aren't hitting that demographic, you aren't fixing stunting, period.
Condition number 3, local empowerment.
This is the big anti-corruption measure. You have to strengthen the real existing MSMEs and warungs, cut out the instant political contractors. If there's a grandmother who's been cooking for the school for 30 years, pay her directly. Don't pay a shell company to then pay her a fraction of the cost.
That seems like the hardest one to implement because it requires dismantling the entire patronage network that's been built up.
It requires immense political will. It requires a government to value its community over its cronies.
And finally, condition number 4, the metrics. How we measure success.
Success cannot, under any circumstances, be measured by number of meals served. That is a vanity metric. It's meaningless. We served 10 million meals. Who cares if the meals were bad or if the kids were already cognitively stunted?
So what should the metric be instead?
A measurable drop in the national stunting rate, a drop in maternal mortality, tangible, verifiable health outcomes. If billions are spent and the stunting rate doesn't go down, the program is a failure no matter how many shiny plastic trays were bought.
It's a sobering reality check for that grand, golden 2045 vision.
It really is.
Yeah.
The sources end with this thought-provoking point about the workforce. We're celebrating this demographic bonus, all these young people entering the workforce. But if our young people are stopping at primary education, or if the jobs available to them only require primary education, what bonus are we actually celebrating?
We're celebrating a large workforce of drivers and waiters, which, as we've established with the story of Mass T, is dignified, important work. I don't want to disparage that in any way.
No, absolutely not. Mass T has more dignity in his little finger than the corrupt contractor stealing money from the tray budget. But the economy needs to be honest with itself. It needs to support Mass T, not exploit him.
Precisely. We need to build a society where Mass T can thrive, because his hard work is valued and pays a living wage, not one where he is pushed aside by a political system that prioritizes flash over substance.
And certainly not one where his own children are fed a free meal that effectively puts him and his neighbors out of business.
So we have traversed quite a landscape today. We went from the absolute scandal of the 80,000 rupiah plastic tray, a symbol of greed and systemic rot, to the quiet dignity of Mass T in his taxi, a symbol of resilience and the value of effort.
We looked at the biology of the developing brain and the history of the guerrilla fighters who fed a revolution from their own kitchens.
And the core lesson, it seems, is that policies are like people. They live within cultures. You cannot just import a system, like Norway school lunches, without understanding the local artifacts of care, the kitchens, the cooperatives, the community trust that already exists.
If you ignore those artifacts, you get corruption and waste. If you embrace them, you might actually nourish the nation, not just feed it.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought for you, the listener. It comes back to that reflection from the drama Ocean.
Born to work, born to endure.
In our rush to help, in our rush to provide free things, are we feeding the body while starving the soul? Is the ultimate goal of a nation to provide free things, or is the goal to build a society where no one needs things to be free in order to live a dignified life?
That's a question I think we will be chewing on for a long time. Is the goal dependence, or is the goal liberation?
It is the ultimate test of governance.
It really is.
Thank you for taking the deep dive with us today.